Yeah.
Got one. No, no, it's not a burning question, but it's a question that has been bothering me that speaks to our oversight work. That the department uh, has got a lot of unfinished projects,
Yeah.
and this is continuing. And now, in line of what we were taught yesterday as students, uh, what is it that we have to do? Because the reality is that projects don't finish on time. Yes, you know what you have told in theory. It's more on the project management processes. But in reality, this is what we are faced with. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll try and weave it into the story of what we're doing today. But I think what I'm trying to position with you is where is the problem? And I think this is something that you should be asking. Are we whipping the people at the bottom to try and improve performance, or do we start from the top? I believe you've got to start from the top down. You know, it's a case of we've had 25 years of the IDIP program, the IDMS, and all these other things that government has had of support. I looked at all of that when I was doing work for the National Planning Commission, and the conclusion we've come to is they have not solved the problem for many, many years. Why? Because it's all premised, if we improve management, we're going to get projects and we're going to have improved in performance. To me, if we improve decision making, which starts from the top down, that's when you're going to get effect. So we'll try and pick it up as we go along today. Now, what I wanted to bring across to you today as a
Sorry, before you continue, I just want to ask, and I think you say that you'll answer the questions as we go along. But in whose interest is it that we have a department which does not have capacity? The institutional structure of the department is such that it cannot do its own oversight over projects because they don't have. The deputy minister was here and he started to explain a little bit to us about issues around continuity, and that whenever there's a change of minister, there might then be a change of DG, and then the capacity managerially doesn't seem to continue. But for me, to have a department which does not have the institutional capacity to oversee projects, project management at the basic level, it seems to me that it is in the interest of whoever is the implementing agency, whoever that might be. It could be the contractor. As you were saying yesterday, there needs to be a symbiotic relationship between the contractor and the engineer who's overseeing a project. And sometimes this is not there. But this is capacity which has been hollowed out over the years, where we might say this is public works, but the actual projects, they belong to the departments. And then because there's confusion about roles, because there's also a role clarity issue, which I think needs to be dealt with. Who is accountable? Who's responsible? These are very different things in terms of a RASI model that you sort of have to look at, and who reports to who and how. in order to get this thing to be streamlined, because it's going to take a lot of time
Absolutely.
to get us to where we need to get to. I got a sense yesterday, we talked to Infrastructure South Africa. I got a sense that something starts as a secretariat because somebody wanted to coordinate certain things. And then you end up creating an agency, an infrastructure agency whose role it is to debottleneck. But the people who ought to make the decisions are not making the decisions. That's why you now have this, because people need a middleman who must help them to think through things. But there needs to be a tone at the top that says you will do 1, 2, 3, because this is what the outcomes are going to be. Because we are going to be saying a lot of things. Even this committee will be coming to the ministers and say, Minister, you promise you're going to do 1, 2, 3, you're not doing it. But why? It's because strategy and structure, they're not aligned.
No, you're 100% correct, and I'll come to you now. But what I will be doing today, I've tried to design what I am presenting to you to raise some of those questions and some of those answers. So the last session today, I'll be going through the whole implementing agent and this problem of the relationships that you're talking about. You're 100% spot on with that. And I think it's also about a culture and how governance needs, how things need to work. I have got in the guide that I gave, and maybe in tea break, I'll put up a different slide to just show you. There was work done by, I don't know if you know Dr. Sean Phillips. He's the DG in Water and Sanitation. Now, I've known him for many, many years. Now, before he went in to do the performance monitoring in the presidency, he did some research looking through modes of governance. Now, this applies exactly to infrastructure as well. And he categorized it into 3 categories. And I'll put the slide up later because I think it's very important. We'll start the next session with that you can see it. The first is that you can have an administrative paradigm. In other words, everything is administratively. Now, when I started in the railways many years ago, that's exactly it. You had the ladies with the trolleys that brought the files through. It went right up to the top. Someone signed it at the top. It went up and down. And all you were was part of the chain in writing something down and escalating it up. That's the old style. Then we brought in management. The PFMA, the MFMA was quite correct. We moved away from an administrative paradigm, because that is how the nationalist government worked in the past, is if you wanted a white male Afrikaner dominated thing, a couple of people at the top set the administration, everybody was administrative and off it went. We now came with new government, quite correctly, that chose management. Now, the problem with management is you need to also link it to leadership. Leadership and management run hand in hand. Leadership is to get the job done. Management is to make sure that you're managing and controlling the processes. But you cannot exercise management in the absence of governance. We need to move to the governance paradigm, which is above. So it's administrative, management, governance. But what we've done is we're turning back to the administrative rather than having the governance side of things. And so, as Sean will say, it's safer to do nothing, because if it's not in the admin side and there's a rule for it, you do nothing. Whereas what we should be doing is we should be moving to the maturity from management into governance, that then people can lead knowing that you've got the backup from governance. And so this is just as a starter. I'll pick it up after tea just to show you through that, because I think it's a very critical element in what we're talking about. But I will illustrate the points that you've raised during the course of the day. Happy with that? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watermeyer. You may have covered this yesterday after I left, but I think I would like to raise it now so that we also include it at some point in today's discussions. One, it's about the long-term development framework plan. I feel that in government, this is where we're seriously lacking. You know, the long-term plans generally span 15, 20, even 25 years. But the term of the politicians is 5 years.
Yeah.
And so what happens is this long-term plan often gets reviewed every 5 years when it really shouldn't be the case, because politicians want to see short-term goals in order to be able to exist beyond the 5 years. So the planning and all of that then takes place. You want to achieve things in 5 years, and that's where we don't become like the Chinas and the Singapores of the
Exactly.
world. We'll never become like that because our planning is short term. We want to get the most that we can in the 5 years to guarantee us another 5 years in government. So it's obviously linked up to the way we are politically aligned. So shouldn't we be thinking about a long-term strategy that's almost cast in stone and made into law that cannot be changed? So that every time you determine your medium-term frameworks, they must fit into this broader long-term strategy, that no new politician comes in and starts changing the long-term vision.
And
It's something we can think about.
100%, and we'll
Right,
try
but I'm
and
not
we'll
over.
try and fit in.
Yeah.
What I learned, I had explained many years ago. I worked with one of the DGs in public works, and he explained to me medium and long term. Short term is what can we do in the next 3 months. Medium term is what is before the next election, and long term is after the next election. So I fully understand the comment you're making, and I think we've got to find ways of embedding and moving forward. I was just very struck by, I was in Geneva at the beginning of last month for the International Federation of Consulting Engineers conference, and they were talking about the whole sustainability and infrastructure. And we had someone from the Swiss government there. And you know how the Swiss government works with major infrastructure? Like he was using it as an illustration that because Switzerland sits between France and Italy, you've got the Alps and all the rest of it. So if you go around Germany, your transport routes are phenomenal. Now, the way to do it would be to go through Switzerland. So there were two choices, and this just illustrates the long-term side of things. The two choices they gave the population, and they go out for voting on these issues. So the vote was, do you want it to be road, or do you want it to be rail? Because if road comes along, you're going to have just the trucks. You're going to become the trucking through there. People voted for rail. Government then went and did it. It was a more expensive route. They built the longest tunnel in the world, 55 kilometers. So the trains run through, and Switzerland is the corridor through. But the point is they got the people to vote, make a decision, and you can't change that with another government because the people have voted. You know, the only time we have referendums is really around the politics. Whereas we should be saying, like, had people had a vote with maybe the toll roads, we wouldn't have had the mess that we've got. In other words, you've got certainty, you've got your mandate, this is it, and it's not going to change.
Now, if I may just continue, the issue of transformation within the construction sector. Now, you know, if you speak to contractors, particularly black emerging contractors, they will tell you that it's a mission to break to make headway, especially with all the regulatory bodies that we have. They don't see them as who should not necessarily be criminalized. And I think we need to take the bull by the horns and deal with these issues. I accept that there are criminal elements everywhere, but should we be calling them the construction mafia like we called the freedom fighters terrorists during apartheid? Because if you look at what they are asking for, all they're saying is they want a space in the construction industry where they can occupy lead construction roles. At the moment, they cannot break through that. What are the hurdles? What are the hurdles that they find in their path? I don't know what they are, except that we find that the minister and others are merrily going around, including our deputy minister. These are construction mafia. They are criminals. We need to get the police to arrest them and do all of that. Have we ever engaged them through a formal process, through a sort of a workshop of some means? Bring them on board and let's understand them. I mean, I've had the fortune or misfortune to have met a few of the so-called construction mafia. And I can tell you they have legitimate concerns. And if we do not put it on the table and start to engage them, then it's going to become ugly. I served on the water board from Guinea Water. And we realized that if we did not engage with the so-called construction mafia, none of our projects would have gotten off the ground. We met with them. We came to a compromise. We started giving them a percentage of contracts through a legal framework we created, and there were no issues. Everything went exceptionally well. So I think that we need to bring that. And one of the biggest key takeaways today is for us to deal with the issue of transformation in the sector and to deal with what has been created now, an offshoot of this lack of transformation, what we loosely term construction mafia. Thank you.
Yeah, look, yesterday we spoke briefly about some of the issues about like project value, because the issue is construction brings jobs and it brings it targeted to the lower income, the lesser skilled. It also brings in the subcontractors, the smaller and things like that. And there's no doubt in my mind that needs to be accommodated. There's a lot of legitimate issues surrounding the so-called construction mafia. There is the criminal element, but the vast majority is people just want an opportunity to participate in a project and have an income stream. That's exactly it. Now, I haven't prepared statistics and things like this around transformation. I will try and talk around that as we go through some of the issues, because I was more giving you the context. But I also think that it depends upon what you define as transformation and how you view the figures. You've got statistics, and damn lies. Like, for example, if I look at the Engineering Council, you can go to their website. I looked at it maybe 2 years ago. I don't think it's changed. They will say that 12% of professional engineers are black. Terrible statistic, okay? But go and have a look at their annual reports. They give you the age groups of engineers broken down in terms of age. Do you know that 1/3 of professional engineers on their register are over the age of 70? Another third is between 60 and 70. If you then take, for example, you take the technologists and the engineers, because remember, a lot of people, to me, the one went through the theoretical route, the other went through the practical route. Both operate transactionally. There's very few that don't operate transactionally. So if we said they were the same, because a lot of the black folk went the experiential route because of financial conditions and things like that, if you bring them into the mixture, we're probably sitting somewhere around about 50 to 60% black. So it all depends how you play with the statistics. If you look at the CIDB and you look at some of their statistics that they've published, They will also talk about black ownership of companies. Is it the 51% or is it the 100% black owned? If you look at the 51%, there's been phenomenal transformation through the whole ranks. If you're looking at the 100% black, then there's still a long way to go. So I think there's these kind of debates that need to be sorted out to try and address some of the statistics. But what I wanted to do today is take you through in the session up to lunch to take you through some of the processes of how infrastructure delivery takes place, the asset management, the budgeting and planning, and the delivery management, to give you an idea of how the whole lot hangs together, to give you the context. So it's more just talking about the context. And what I wanted to bring to you is it's taken me most of my working life to figure out what the industry is all about. And forget all the clutter, it's all about a flow of information. So if you think today, whatever I'm talking about this morning is I'm going to take you through the flow of information, how the flows work, because if you understand that, then within the flows, you can put controls in, you can put decision points. Because so that's essentially the way I'm going to tackle it today. So the infrastructure systems and processes, when I talk about infrastructure delivery, I'm talking about all the aspects, the technical, administrative, managerial actions and activities associated with construction, supply, refurbishment, alteration, maintenance, whatever. In other words, we've got to look at the whole picture of how it all comes together. And I think this will also help you understand some of the capacity issues that were raised as well in government and where we get them. So if you look at this triangle that I have put together, there are three cornerstones in infrastructure delivery. One is going to be your asset management system, because at the end of the day, government owns a phenomenal amount of assets that need to be maintained. We've also got a balance that we need to have planning and budgeting to determine what we need to do, what our priorities are, and then we also need to have the mechanisms for delivery management. And I've defined delivery management as the critical leadership role played by a knowledgeable client. That's the issue. Knowledgeable client to plan, specify, procure, and oversee the delivery of infrastructure projects, including knowledgeable leadership, consistent governance, and systematic administration of procurement contracts and public finances. That, to me, is the role of the public sector. You can't outsource that leadership role, okay? You can outsource the support to provide the necessary advice, and don't think that South Africa is the only country that is having difficulties. I remember a number of years ago, I met with the Chief Construction Advisor to the UK government. We were having lunch together and chatting. He's also part of some of the institutions that I've been working with. And he stopped me when I was explaining to him what I was trying to do in South Africa. And he said, Ron, we both trying to solve the same problem, to rebuild the knowledgeable client. Same issues in the UK, same issue around the world, and a lot of these principles that I'm running through today, I've put into an international standard that is in the process of now being finalized and will be used in various countries. Okay? So let's unpack it. And remember, procurement should just take place whenever resources are required. We have huge confusion in this country as to what procurement is, but go back to the Constitution, you were talking 217. When an organ of state contracts for goods and services. So procurement is about contracting for goods and services, okay? In its simplicity, buying and selling, okay? We can put all the peripheral stuff to it, but that's the center of it. Okay, so what I'm going to go through is take you through the infrastructure systems and processes. A lot of little diagrams, but just try and understand the flow of logic of what I'm going to be talking about. You can see an asset management system in the right-hand corner, where we're going to go through policies, assessments, service life planning, delivery processes, critical needs, and the output of that system is going to be into the strategic planning processes, because the strategic planning processes are going to be linked to the budgets that we've got and what we're going to do for a period of time, the short, medium, and long term. You've got to go through also a number of project preparation processes. It's one thing to just identify a project, but you've got to go through the processes to sort out the environmental issues, the licensing, the refining of the problem, if there's also acquisition of land and all of those kind of things that need to be done. And then you're going to go into your portfolio planning processes, which will then run through your project, detailed design, site processes, closeout, and whenever you need resources anywhere, you're going to procure it. So that's the basic model, which I will now unpack and take it in detail as we go through. Now, I also thought it would also be useful to just show you the procurement cycle. In my book, procurement is the process which creates, manages, and fulfills contracts. That's essentially what I believe the Constitution was calling procurement. So if we look at this wheel that we go around, we have right at the center, we have our policy, which needs to guide our planning processes, our evaluation and award phase, and contract management. Now, in infrastructure, we spoke about yesterday, because of risks and change management, critical is our construction management side of phase, the administration of contracts. So those are the three areas that we're going to deal with in procurement. So if you then go into the bigger wheel, you're going to have your strategic planning. You're then going to run through your plan and specify, procure, and oversee delivery. So the whole idea in this one, as you go through it, if we run the wheel at the top and we just run through this sort of process flow to give you an idea, and then during the day I'm going to fill in some of the details around these processes, you're going to have your business need, business case, then you have a decision gate, because do we proceed with it, yes or no? All our socioeconomic stuff we were talking about yesterday, project value, all of that must be in the business case. It's not just about delivering infrastructure, it's also delivering what are the impacts on the environment, as we spoke about yesterday, sustainability, employment, and what is the project and what is the public value that it's creating. You're then going to go through a procurement strategy. What is a procurement strategy? Is how we're going to approach the market, how we're going to run things. We're then going to go into a concept report where we develop a strategic brief for the project, so those who are going to design it know what we want, because government has to specify what it requires. The detail will be sorted out, but the overarching thrust needs to be done. We then have to go through a concept report. All that a concept report is, I have a solution to the brief that you've asked me to do, if you're thinking of it like that. You're then going to go through processes of having a decision gate. Are we happy with the solution that's there? Is it going to yield the benefits that we expect? Is it going to allow our job creation, dealing with community involvement, all of that in it? No problem. We decide. We then go through our procurement tactics in putting the procurement documents together to go to the market. And that's where a lot of the empowerment problems fall down, because nobody documents it and makes it a contractual deliverable. To me, that should be part and parcel of the deliverable, because when you put a contract together, you're going to do two things. I call it a scope of work. The scope of work is going to have two components to it. The first component is going to be, what are you going to leave behind? So if you look in this building that you've got here, you can see the detailing, you can see what's been left behind. This would have been specified to the contractor. What you don't see was the constraints to doing this job. You don't see the health and safety constraints. You don't see if the client said, we want to use local materials. We want to use small contractors involved in it. All of those things are part and parcel of describing in your procurement documents. So when you've got your contractor appointed, he knows this is his obligations, and he is going to have to engage with communities, etc., to achieve these targets and deliver on them. We're then going to have solicit the tender offers, evaluate tender offers, award contract, administer contract, confirm compliance with requirements, commission the works, hand over the works, contract closeout, project closeout. There's the wheel, the cycle that runs through. And then obviously when we finish, we then have got the in-use, which is going to go into some of our asset management to maintain, facilities management to operate, and we're going to have at some point in time, to refurbish, rehabilitate, decommission, or demolish the works. So that is the whole cycle in a nutshell, okay? I'll unpack some of these in a bit more detail as we go along. We went through this yesterday in terms of where the starting point is, the client value proposition, which is the promise of measurable benefits, impacts resulting from the project. In other words, focusing on what the project is going to achieve, not what the project is going to deliver in terms of a building necessarily. That's a part of it, but is not the whole. You're going to land up with what we spoke about was project value, which is the outcome of the client decision making, not the outcome of the consultant's or the contractor's decision making. And you're running to achieve an optimal balance of project benefits, risks, and costs. And we went through the process of, you're going to specify, you're going to put your value proposition together, you're going to acquire your resources to procure them, you're going to then go through the project activities and arrive at that. And the client's function is to plan, specify, procure, and oversee delivery. You can't just step back. That's a knowledgeable client. Because if you just hand that over, you're going to then rely, and that's where you raised the question about why projects fail, why projects don't get completed, because you're relying on the fortunate combination of, through your procurement system, that you've got a good consultant, you've got a good contractor, and they just happen to understand what you wanted. So that is an immature approach where you're going to have occasionally projects that are successful. If you're going to take it seriously and perform these functions, then you're going to step in when projects are failing, when projects are not running on time, and taking course correction, which I'll explain in a moment. We spoke yesterday about the difference between controlling practices and influencing practices. Now, the buying function is very definitely part of the client function. And the influencing practices is to convert the value proposition into project outcomes. The focus is not on the detail. The focus is, this is what the project is trying to achieve. This is what we need to do. And if we've got public value as engaging communities and doing local economic development, that needs to be an integral part of the project and not an afterthought. So the planning is to decide on what should be done, how it is to be resourced. The resourcing would include what elements of the community are you going to get engaged in it, and achieved, and in what timeframes, and set a budget. The specifying is to define the organizational expectations, the high level the functional and other requirements for the project. In other words, what are we going to try and achieve? Do we need to engage with these community forums, or how are we going to get all of that in? All of that needs to be specified and included in your procurement. And your procurement is to obtain the resources. And remember, yesterday we said that when you mobilize a supply chain, it's all about the contractual relationships between them. So contracts drive the whole process. So if government is weak on contracts, that is where you're going to find the clawing back and all the cost leakages and things go, because people are going to take advantage of weaknesses in documents and things like that. It's just human nature. Oversee delivery is to observe and define the execution of the project to realize the organization's value proposition associated with the project. Sorry, I jumped. With the project justification. Now, let me try and illustrate this to you. Remember yesterday, I went through the illustration of you building your dream house, and you had the windows changed just to illustrate that things were going to change. Now, think of it this way. If you ran your own project and you commissioned a builder to build a house and to complete the extension before the Christmas holidays. Contractor comes to you, typically, he comes to you in November and he says, boss, you know, I'm not going to make it on time. Now you've got your in-laws coming, you've got everything else like this. Do you just turn around and say, oh, shame, it's okay, just deliver it next year? No, you're going to exercise some leadership. You're going to sit down with him and say, chum, let's sort this issue out. Okay? Now, what I found very interesting is I did mention earlier about solving the knowledgeable client when I met with the chief construction advisor to the UK government. He was from the private sector, and he was working with all the infrastructure departments to improve performance. And I asked Peter, I said, Peter, what would you have as the qualifications for someone to run a major project in the UK? And he looked at me tongue-in-cheek and laughed, and he said if he had his way, he would not allow anyone to run a major project if they hadn't run a major house alteration with their own money. You see the leadership side of things. So we just say, oh, you know, we can't, the contractors can't do it, consultants can't do it. Make a plan. I mean, if I think of when we were delivering the Sol Plaatje University, we had very, very tight deadlines. We had 600 million rands worth of buildings to put up in 14 months with 2 Christmases in between. So it was mission impossible from the beginning. You were going to just make it. If anything went wrong, there would be issues. So what happens? We strip the shuttering from a slab. The slab comes down 150 millimeters, rips the staircases and things like this. A major structural problem. What happened is a designer forgot to connect a column and in a stairwell to a beam. And so it went down. There's no ways you could blame the contractor because he wouldn't have known that. His drawings didn't show. The column was 150 millimeters proud of the stairwell. So what do? Do you say, oh, we had this problem, we'll try and resolve it? Now, the fact of the matter is you've got students coming in to use that facility at the start of the academic year. So what do? You sit down with the contractor, you sit down with the design team, you exercise leadership and say, how are we going to achieve our objectives? Sit down with the university. The Vice-Chancellor said, well, look, fortunately, this was in an area which was an admin side of things. He could hold off some of his admin staff moving in. Can we get the contractor to focus on what repairs needed to be done to open the academic facilities on time? We could ask him for changes in program. It might cost us a bit more to get the timing right because it'll save us instead of having alternative accommodation. All of those things need to happen as a leadership thing. So we delivered the academic facilities on time for the opening because we exercised the leadership. But if we just sat back and said, well, we'll allow the professional indemnity to sort it out, we'll get the money in, but that's not going to happen from low-level leadership. Okay, so that's the influencing function. That's the buying function, influencing. The project management function is more about the controlling the practices, and the idea there is to monitor and measure performance against an agreed plan. That you can get if you want to have it outsourced or anything else like that. That's purely providing you with information, okay? Because how do you make decisions? You have to make decisions based on information. So what happens there, what you want to do is you want to get what is the agreed plan, what are the changes to the plan that we've agreed, what is our progress. Now, one of the things that we've also got to do is very careful with monitoring is we have to monitor the interfaces between contracts and the interdependencies. To give you an idea, like at the moment, if you look at the Lesotho Highlands project, they're building the Polyhali Dam, which is bigger than the Katsy Dam and Mogale combined. It's got a 38-kilometer tunnel. Now, if you're going to, you've got 50 square kilometers of surface area. You can't fill the dam with water before you finished the tunnel. You can't fill the dam with water before you've built all the bridges and access, moving people, all of these things. So your project management has got to get the various moving parts together, sorted out, provide information for the client to make decisions, okay? So project management is controlling practices to get information for the client to make decisions. Now, how do we do that? Now, I will come back to this after lunch when we start talking about the coordinating and the implementing departments, but I just wanted to take you through the sort of broad outline. How do we get the this whole client delivery management to work? So the way I would look at it is we've got a number of functional areas. We have a governance and oversight function. That is going to be your accounting officer and his senior executives, okay? Because their role is to govern the organization. Remember I spoke to you about administrative management governance. You need to have the governance to make decisions. What we've got there is you've also got the finance function is to pay the contractors on time. You have a finance management function going up to executive manager, and then you see I've got a project steering committee, which if you took all your executive managers to take responsibility for advising the accounting officer on the implications of the infrastructure projects, you're then going to get proper decision making that's coordinated. Because what happens is this guy says, man, my project is running late. Now, if something is running late, the reason why you wanted that project, it links to something else. So someone else in the organization now can't do his work because the infrastructure is not there. So we need to find ways of, in the governance of the organization, to coordinate the various activities, okay? We then have what I would call the buying function is a client delivery manager. And I'm talking about the function. That person is going to have single point accountability to exercise what I would call CEO level leadership. He can do that if you have proper governance in place. If you don't have the proper governance in place, you can't exercise leadership. You with me? So it's got to be cascaded down from the top. Now the client delivery manager, he can be supported by an administrative team and a technical team to provide advice to help him in his decision making. And that would then mean that the client delivery management team would own the business case and provide client direction. If you're going to own the business case would also include your socioeconomic, all your empowerment, all of those kind of things. He's got to own that case and make sure that it happens, because his job is plan, specify, procure, and oversee delivery. We also have the procure and arrange payment to the resources, lead the project, manage relationships, and oversee aspects of delivery. Now, he would need technical advice and support to assist him in performing that particular function. Now, we spoke about capacity. There's no reason why you can't get on a part-time basis or anything like that from individuals that are senior professionals, seasoned professionals, to assist in the decision making. They're not doing the work, they're not taking work away from anyone else. All they're doing is they're providing information. Now, they would then assist with empowering. The capacity can be brought in if you've got your client delivery manager who is an official preferably, or has a very special relationship with the organization to focus on doing that as a person that's contracted on maybe a 3 to 5 year basis or whatever it is. But that person is working for the client. They would then do the stakeholder consultations, and they would provide leadership and direction to the delivery team, the consultants, the contractors, and everybody else. That would then allow you to do knowledgeable leadership, consistent governance, and systematic administration. So do you see the components? The components are, you need to have your governance and oversight function in your organization. You need to have finance, who is going to pay the resources and account for expenditure. You need to have your client delivery manager, who is undertaking the procurement, having the payment certified for payment by the finance section. And also you've then got your delivery team, which is being guided and influenced and directed by the client delivery manager. Now look, I do know in the past of where a lot of our problems have occurred is we've had, the whole supply chain management stuff was basically conceptualized as a financial management system under the CFO. Now the CFO can't do all of this work in terms of it's the wrong fit for the construction industry. We don't have to discuss that anymore, because in terms of the Public Procurement Act, when it becomes operationalized, there's no longer going to be the requirement to have it housed in under the CFO. But this is part of the problem that we've had. The other part of the problem is to get people to provide support in the technical team. You've got to go through some contractual process. You can't go and negotiate with people that are the best available and the best fit of a team. So it has been problematic. But, we should be able to resolve those issues. So the structure of the client delivery team is there to provide the knowledgeable leadership, the consistent governance, and the systematic administration of finances. And I've tried to unpack it a little bit more. So your client delivery manager leads the project with single point accountability with a chief executive officer leadership, has direct access to senior management to get advice. So if you're now saying, I've got a course of action to do X, or I've got a course of action to do Y, I can go and consult and get an answer. If you don't have that in the organization, you've got some youngster that has been asked to make these decisions way above his pay grade, and it's better to do nothing. Okay? So we've got to build the system around people. They would report to the governing body, they would set the priorities, lead engagements, and there I've given the technical support, the administrative support. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but you can always procure or arrange somehow to get those resources, and we'll talk more about that after lunch. But as far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse for a client not to have the capacity to deliver projects. It can be done. I've spent the last sort of 15 years of my life really in this technical support team. Now let's look at decision making. Okay? The decision making is and it's a very simple concept. If we think about any activity, it has a starting point and it has an end point. Okay? And in between, we have, at the end of every activity and the start of every activity is a decision. Do we continue with this activity? Have we completed the activity? It's as simple as that. So the issue is, for a project to progress meaningfully, its objectives and their achievements need to be closely allied to their decision structure. So if you don't have the checks and balances and the decision making, you can decide up front, the motherhood and apple pie, we're going to get the community involved. If it's not part of the decision making as the process unfolds, what is the probability of it happening? It's not going to happen. It needs to be managed and influenced. So decisions give purpose to activities. And as far as I'm concerned, if you have a proper system of decision making, it's part of governance of an organization. It's also a quality management system, because any quality management system, you can go back to where the decisions were made, what was the information available when the decision was made, and we can move from there. So what is the role of going through activities in a project? You're going to go through, in a little control system I've got in the top right-hand corner, you're going to do an activity, you're going to observe the outcome, you're going to compare it with what you had planned, and then you're going to make a decision. If it's within what you planned, you will proceed to the next activity. Now the question comes, is what happens if it's not according to plan? You were raising the issue about late completion. Well, if you know that you're running late, well, what are you going to do about it? You've got two options. You can either take steps to change the performance to make sure that we come back to the plan, and that would be your client delivery manager's responsibility. Okay? The other one is change the plan so it more closely reflects the changed situation. But now if you're changing the plan, who owns the plan? The governing body. You've got to go up higher to explain higher up why there is going to be a delay. Okay? So at the end of the day, all your project management function is to provide the information to inform decision making by the client to either do course correction, to try and mitigate the risks and bringing it back to what was planned, or change the plan. And if you change the plan, you're going to go back into governance. So the key questions in moving forward is really project value is the outcome of client decision making to achieve an optimal balance of the project benefits, risks, and costs. And so this is where, as you move forward and you do your oversight, and we'll pick it up again after lunch in some of the issues, is how does a client decision making occur for a project? It's a very good question. And you will find that projects that are running late, that projects don't run, and problems with a lot of the community unrest, etc., all relates back to client decision making. Who makes the decisions and on what basis? And that's why we have to have clear divisions between what is delivery management, what is your governance structures, and is decision making in silos. You know, the problem is when we have silos, we have a silo, this is project management, this is something else, this is contract management, this is financial management with procurement. The minute you've got your silos, you have great difficulty in bringing about change to correct anything because it's someone else's problem. As when I was working with supporting business and labor in the NEDLAC process over the procurement bill, is when you have the silo mentality, as was pointed out by one of the lead for business is you give people a get out of jail card, because then the blame comes. I can't do it because it's in that silo makes that decision. So we need to find a way of integrating in departments. So we need to think about decision making. Who decides changes to the plan to reflect the change situation? Does data inform the decision making? All of those things come in. So as I say, just some good quotes. Sometimes you make the right decision, sometimes you make the decision right, but you made a decision. There was a guy that I met, a very impressive project manager who, as a young person, worked with Sol Kerzner in the delivery of the Sun City. And Sol Kerzner used to say, 5 of the 10 decisions I make are correct. 3 of the decisions that out of the 10 that I make, the guys walking behind me will fix it, and the other 2 decisions we'll have to work our way through. But at least he made a decision. Our biggest problem is indecision, because if you take no decision, you can't get a negative audit. We've got to change the philosophy that if you don't do your job, that should be the problem. You with me? It is. Yeah, but to exercise leadership, you're going to land up with someone that's going to suspend you or whatever it is. That's why you need strong governance. Because if the governance is there, you can exercise leadership because you understand your boundaries. And this comes back to this model of administrative, management, and governance. If we don't have the governance, we have a problem. Okay, so if we look at the delivery management system, and I'm coming back to the flow of information. So I'll show you now that construction is nothing but a flow of information. So if we start at the top and we look at how a project comes together, we're going to have what I called a project inception stage. We're going to have what I would call an initiation report, which would include a high-level business case. Now, for a lot of the smaller projects, you don't have to go into a massive, use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. You've got enough information to actually pass it down the chain into a pipeline of projects. If you now need to go into the stage where you need to have the business case further developed, which is really what Infrastructure South Africa is all about, and I will touch upon later on some more of the processes, you would then have to do your various cases, business case approvals, etc., and you'd go into it more detail. So if you're doing your billion rand project, you're going to have a hell of a lot more hoops to go through quite correctly to assess something to make it investment ready. If you go the other route, you're going to go into some kind of project preparation, etc. What we're then going to have in most situations, I'm not talking about the one-off big projects, you're going to have a pipeline of projects, and we're always going to have more projects than we've got budget for. So there's got to be a prioritization. We work on a three-year MTF period. So the idea is we should, for each financial year, put together the projects that we're going to do in that year. Now, I have called that a project delivery management plan, because that should be the quarterly reporting that goes to the governing body of the organization is, this is what we planned, this is how far we're off the plan, or we're ahead of the plan, or whatever it is. These are the mitigation measures that we are doing. And, or alternatively, we've got to change the plan. This project we're not going to deliver this year because we've hit a major, roadblock, whatever it is. So that, to me, is the key document. Then you've got what we would call strategic resourcing. You've now got, these are the projects I'm going to deliver in this year. How am I going to arrange my delivery management arrangements to get the right capacity and the right capabilities to run the projects? How am I going to allocate responsibilities, and how am I going to approach the market? And there's quite a number of things around there I'll touch upon briefly in another slide. You've now got a project, you come to the project planning. You need to have, first instance, a strategic brief. Well, what is the client expectations? What do they require? That comes down to the specifying function of the client. You then get your designers, your design professionals, who would then develop a concept report. The concept report is, this is the strategic brief you gave me. Here is a solution to your strategic brief. Then you make a decision as an organization, is that what you want? And obviously in all of this, you're going to build your socioeconomic, your public value, benefits, all of that into it as well. You're then going to go, if that is approved, you're now moving into implementation because you have a solution to your brief. Then you're going to go through further design development and develop a design development report. Now, what is a design development report? This is what you're going to get in detail. What is, you've heard people talk about record or as-built drawings. That's the other bookend. When you finished construction, that is really an update of your design development report. This is what I promised you. This is what we've delivered. You're then going to go to the design documentation, because you need to provide information to the contractors to construct the works. You then need to do the works. You need to then, most important, hand over, because otherwise we get these buildings sitting in the veld that are unused. Projects are not handed over, so that's a critical thing. And then the handover will come with the record information and closeout. Can you see the flow of information? Now, you see, each of these have a decision gate. What is the decision gate? Are we doing what we were asked to do? Do we need to change the plan? Or how do we bring it back to the plan? Is the questions that go through. So if you now start thinking about decision-making in an organization, the high-level stuff, the governing body should approve, because that is against their strategic objectives. Okay? Going down, your executive manager might approve some of the plans, in other words, the strategies. But when you come down to the detail and you move down, you're going to delegate that to others to sort the detail out, because the high-level stuff has been agreed to. And if you have to change the plan, you've got to go back up into governance to do so. If you're on track, you will continue down with it. So that's the sort of concept that I'm bringing across. And one of the things I do want to say, where we've had huge problems in South Africa, is the whole definition of supply chain management, that acquisition was taken into a CFO function. Whereas if we look at the project management side of things, the PMBOK, whether you look at the PMBOK or you look at the ISO, in terms of management, planning for procurement, doing the actual tendering process, and the contract administration has always been part of project management. In other words, it's an operational function. It is not a financial management function. So procurement is a strategic function. Now, as far as the options are concerned, I did mention about procurement strategy. And I just wanted to run through, I don't want to go into the details of this, but here's a sort of a diagram that comes from, we developed into an international standard 22058, which has also been adopted as a South African national standard, is you've got to have a strategy, because the strategy determines the number of contracts that you're going to enter into. It also determines the capacity and capabilities of the client delivery management team, which needs to be put in place, and it informs the procurement strategies that are adopted. So it's very important during this strategic resourcing process to think through the issues. So the first question you need to ask is, do you want to make or buy? If you want to make, you're going to have to go through a process where you're going to have to sort out where is the design responsibility, where is the interface management responsibility, and there you will see different options. You're going to have different options, your design by employer, design by contractor, all of those ones we spoke about. But if you decide that you're going to buy, you can purchase completed construction works. Like, for example, when we delivered Solplaatje University, we were not allowed to go to the market to advertise tenders before the seat of learning had been declared. So we had from August to February to put in place residences for something like 70 students. You're not going to do that, not going to build a new building in that. We went and bought a hotel, we bought a block of flats, and we renovated. And you know, guess what? It was cheaper doing that than if we built it ourselves. And we could do it incrementally. We could only say, right, we don't need the whole hotel refurbished. Let's just do the rooms we need for what we need at the moment. So there's different options available. You can enter into public-private partnerships, design, build, operate, lease to own if you want to own it, or if you don't want to own it, you can just simply rent it. So these are the kind of decisions that need to be made at a strategic level, and not automatically we're going to build new infrastructure. So let me just wrap up the session with just in terms of taking you back to the procurement system that is envisaged in the Public Procurement Act. Obviously, there's a lot of regulations still to be written. But what the Act quite correctly looks at is the components of a procurement system. They're defining procurement far broader, and what they've got is a procurement policy, institutional and governance arrangements, demand management, procurement planning, acquisition management, contract management, including assessment of projects against outcomes, risk management, logistic management, disposal management, monitoring and assessment of procurement performance, and reporting. So we sit with the 7th administration coming in with an opportunity to try and get some sense into how we put these things together. Procurement policies of organization should describe the institutional and governance arrangement. Who makes the decisions? I would like to see documents that have been put in place that we describe through our procurement policy who makes the decisions when we're dealing with infrastructure delivery. What about when we come to the procurement planning and processes? Who is allocated that? We've got to start thinking about how this is done through operational sections rather than financial management sections. So I think we're living in an era where there's going to be a lot of change and a lot of opportunity, and depending upon how we do it, we're either going to improve delivery or retard it. The findings that I developed with Dr. Sean Phillips for the National Planning Commission, we did an extensive review of all the infrastructure delivery. You can download it from their site. And the conclusion we came to that the reason for poor performance in delivery of projects relates to procurement and delivery management arrangements. It's one of the central things. So I just mentioned with the Act, there's a lot of things that we will move through. Now, after T, I will take you through briefly the asset management and budgeting and planning systems, but I hope this has given you some idea of the context within which we're delivering infrastructure. So I think we're on time for T. So I'll take questions when we come back after T, if there's any additional questions. So I think let's keep to T, and we'll come back at, if I understand correctly, 1:45, is it? Yeah, okay. I'll see you back at 1:45. Okay. I did speak to you about the different paradigms in governance, and I've put this up on the screen. I pulled it out of a presentation I gave to the Forum of DGs. This comes from very much the work of Sean Phillips in public administration, public management, public governance. So if you look at it in terms of public administration, it's a dominance of rules where the job of the civil servants is to implement the rules. And as Sean says, if there is no rule, do nothing. And highly centralized decision-making, management discretion discouraged. That's what I grew up in the old South Africa system of administration. We then went for the public management, which is the decentralization of decision-making, giving managers responsibility for decision-making, but making them accountable, and the emphasis on efficiency and cost management, controls, inputs, outputs, performance management, and audits. And then it goes through to public governance, where the focus is on intergovernmental relationships and the governance of processes, the service effectiveness and outcomes. Now, the question we've got to ask is, we designed the Public Finance Management Act to bring us into a management paradigm, but have we gone into governance, or have we reverted back to administration? And I sense a lot of our problems with service delivery is we've regressed back into at a time where things were not as they are at the moment. There's complexity, and with complexity, the only way you're going to sort complexity through governance. So to read more about it, guide that I gave you, if you go to page 80, it discusses this act. I hope that's full in just understanding in mapping the future way you want to go. Because where you do your reform, you're going to pitch it at an administrative or a strategic level, and which one is going to have the best effect. Okay, let me just go back to where we were. Okay, any burning questions or comments from the previous session? Otherwise, I'll happily just move on. Okay. I'm now going to come to the asset management and the planning and budgeting system to try and unpack that you have an understanding. The questions about GIAMA I will be dealing with after lunch. So I thought it was best to go through what the principles are and then go into what the legislation. And when you look at the Act and you read the Act correctly, I hadn't read it for a long time, and when I did read it, I see it's totally aligned. But it's the devil is in the detail. Is it being implemented is another question. Yeah. Okay. So what we're now looking at is our asset management system. And remember, the importance of the asset management is that if you take the total cost of ownership of infrastructure, I'm talking rule of thumb because various infrastructure is going to be different, but you're going to be looking at that 20% of the costs relate to construction, or 20 to 30, and 70 to 80% is going to be during the life of the project. In fact, I'm doing some work with student housing at the moment, and the private housing providers are saying that if you take the capital and maintenance costs as about 50% of the operational costs of student accommodation. So it's a big chunk. And so we've got to understand that asset. So if I had to put an asset management system together, and I'm just talking the logic of it, because I'm going to try and take it from a flow of information and a conceptual level. We're going to have an asset management policy, and levels of service is our starting point. Okay? The policy is going to say what our principles are and what we're trying to achieve. The levels of service is where do we pitch the level of service. I just overheard the discussion you were having with the hotel staff, and that's really about the level of service. You know, the level of service is a high level. You'd have all the water bottles replaced every time, etc. So one has got to have some kind of level of service to understand where you're going to pitch things at, because otherwise we go too high or we go too low. I will tend to agree with you. Asset management's not my strong point. I've been more on the procurement and delivery side. But from what I can gather from my asset management colleagues, and if you ever need more detailed discussion, I can bring colleagues in who can take on with that. But I think there is room for standardizing levels. If we take the different asset classes like municipalities, we should all be operating, because it comes back to the principle of equity. We can't have unequal, that if you live in Sandton, you have this level of service, and if you live in Alexandria, you get that level of service. So I fully support that, but I think we haven't invested enough in asset management. I don't think we've realized the importance of asset management, is my personal view. When the penny drops with that, perhaps you should be saying to the CIDB, why haven't you done something about standardizing the asset management processes? You see, we've had a problem, because depending, if you go into the legislation, take Gyama out of it, there's very little in the legislation around asset management. In fact, the PFMA allows, as a financial management function, Treasury to prescribe asset management. But they're not the technical people. This is a technical issue. So it's in the wrong house. You go to the MFMA, there's very little. There's one sentence on asset management. I mean, even if you take your Gyama, where's your regulations? Where are your guides? Where are your standards? Nothing. Nothing. So there's a huge area that you put your finger on to get it right, because we're in crisis. Okay? So looking at that, you're going to have your levels of service, so you're going to have an asset management policy and a level of service. What would then, that would inform the asset register. Now, an asset register is just simply a record of what you've got. You cannot manage without knowing what you've got. Okay? I've got into the sort of asset management side of things because I've spent the last 3 or 4 years, or I spent 3-4 years with Department of Higher Education and Training providing capacity building support to the 26 universities. Now, we don't think about this. Do you know that the universities are some of the biggest property owners in South Africa? Did you know that Pretoria University is the second highest ratepayer in Tshwane, second to Roslyn BMW factory? They've got 930 odd buildings or something like that with a million square meters to maintain. UCT is the biggest property owner in UCT, in Cape Town. Wits is second to Joburg Municipality. 70% of the rates and taxes in Stellenbosch come from Stellenbosch University. Rhodes University provides 60% of Grahamstown. So we've been looking at asset management in that sort of context, and so a lot of this comes from that sort of work. Your starting point is understand what your asset register is. Then you need to say, if I know what my asset is, what is my condition? I cannot look at levels of service if I don't know what my condition is. Okay? What you're then going to have is your service life planning. And we'll explain some of the concepts around service life planning. It's not rocket science, but it just needs to be done systematically. Is we need to then understand what is my plan to keep this functioning for whatever the service life of the asset is.
A year later, let me give you an example. At Ugu municipality, they decided that they're going to insource their water tankering services. You go there a year later, you find all these fancy tankers that they bought lying in the scrap heap, simply because there was no service level agreements determined and followed through. So I fully agree with you. But for me, the challenge is developing, and you say there's no legislation that sort of standardizes this type of thing. And maybe you're speaking to the right audience right now.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think we're in the 7th administration. Surely we need to ring the bells.
Correct. So we need to be introducing legislation, and you need to help us do that.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got, like, if you wanted to try and standardize, you've already got CIDB, or, you know, you can always find other avenues, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree.
You know, because a lot of people say, we can't do this, we need to change the act. I don't believe so. A lot of the acts, you've just got to have some good imagination and interpret it to include those things. If you're looking at construction industry development, you cannot ignore maintenance and asset management.
Absolutely.
It's a package deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're then going to do is, from your service life plans, you're going to review from time to time your critical needs, because this is all about risk management. So you're going to, on a risk basis, decide what your most critical need is, and that is going to go up into your infrastructure planning and budgeting system. In other words, you've now got to get the budget to do what your critical needs are. Okay? So it's a very simple process. Then a very important one as well that must not be forgotten is the delivery process inputs, because asset management needs to inform some of the designs. Because, you know, you can design something that it doesn't last, or you can over-design for something like, for example, and I'm not being critical, if you look at like Joburg motorways were designed for mining subsidence which never took place. Now, do you just continue catering for that, or do you have discussions that come back? So I think there's a lot of interaction that needs to take place between those that are designing and consultants that specialize in design don't understand asset management, and there needs to be that cross-pollination. And I remember I had a number of years ago down at eThekwini with, I had some young graduates that were from around the world that were like apprentices, and they were learning about things, and we took them through some of the fantastic programs that eThekwini was doing at that stage, the water upgrading and all the rest of it. Yeah, Neil, I was going to mention Neil McLeod's name. And I remember, yeah, that was with Mike Sutcliffe and Derek and the whole bunch. Yeah, I worked with him to get the program going. Now, when I brought them in, Neil McLeod asked these youngsters what was the most important thing that they'd learned about the infrastructure, or they should know about it. And, you know, everybody came about the design, the labor intensive, the this, that, the other. He said, no, the record information. Because if I don't get the record information, I cannot manage my assets. And if you look at that program, why did it kick off? Because you didn't even know where the asbestos pipes were. You had no records. So it's a very critical thing, these linkages. So I've tried to show the linkages. This is just at the high level. We'll now go through it in a bit more detail. So the fundamentals of asset management is that the asset exists to provide value. If there is no value in an asset, get rid of it. It's as simple as that. If it is underperforming, you're not getting the value out of it. So asset management is all about value. So the realization of value normally involves the balancing of costs, risks, and opportunities and performance benefits. It's a professional judgment that's needed in all of this to come up with, to get the right balance. Okay? Asset management translates the organizational objectives into technical and financial decisions, plans, and activities, flow of information. So the output of asset management is an asset management plan which management can make decisions on to select projects of what needs to be done. So we're still back to flow of information. Okay? Yeah.
Just raise the importance of flow of information, but at particular nodes, decisions made, but reporting
Yeah.
up and down.
Yeah.
Because for us as an oversight body, it's that type of information that we need to source at times, rather than asking the official questions. Or source the information, analyze it, then ask them questions.
Dividing up your portfolios and allocating responsibilities. You know, like I learned many years ago, if you write the word assume, do you know what assume means? Write it out. It's to make an ass of you and me. Yeah. We got to, don't assume it's been allocated responsibility. And that's why it's important to have policies to put things down. Okay. No. Okay, an asset register. So a major starting point is the identification of all existing assets. And look, asset registers can be developed over time. You don't have to have everything up front 100%, but you need to start putting it in place. An asset register can be developed incrementally based on the level of accuracy needed versus affordability. We can spend a fortune in getting an absolutely perfect asset register in place, but it's not going to help us with our decisions. So we've got to find what investment you're going to put into it to find out what you're going to use. An initial high-level asset register need not be resource intensive, but can produce quick results. And so as a minimum, an asset register should simply cost modeling, recognize the different risk profiles of the assets and the minimum level of detail necessary to make informed decisions. So it should be broken down on the basis of risk. There are some things that are higher risk, some things you can tolerate. And here we've given in an asset register questions to be asked and steps to be followed. In other words, what level of information needs to be gathered. So you can, if you're looking at what an asset register should have, this is the typical kind of things that should be asked for. A minimum should contain the asset identification, the size, the asset location, quantity, materials type, year constructed, construction cost. And that's where it's so important that when you come to your record information, that's with new projects that are delivered, you need to feed it into your asset management system. And so often that doesn't take place. Further details may include condition grade, capacity, utilization, remaining useful life, depreciated replacement cost, asset performance, and so on. So these sort of to give you an idea of an asset register. We now come to the condition assessments. The condition assessments, and that's where you quite correctly say, if we don't have levels of performance sorted out, how do I assess what the condition is? I've got to have it against a benchmark of performance. So that's why I've got on the one side the asset management policy, which outlines the principles, legislation, environmental and political requirements. And remember, with a lot of asset management, there is a lot of legislative requirements because there's health and safety issues, lots of it. So the levels of service need to put in the quality, reliability, responsiveness, responsibilities, etc., and performance measures. So if you've got that, then you conduct regular condition assessments and record the condition. So the whole condition assessment is all about the knowledge of the condition and remaining useful life. That's why in your asset register, if you know when it was constructed, it's a good starting point. You know roughly what is going to happen if it was constructed to the right quality, assuming. You're going to have to, it's all about understanding the future need and forecasting. So this is way beyond the sort of political periods and things like this. One has got to take a long-term view on assets because they're going to be there irrespective of what administration is in place. So what you want is knowledge of the remaining useful life, and that provides information into the budgeting process because that will help you on a risk basis to prioritize. Then we've got condition assessments are key determination of the remaining useful life. You cannot sit in an office and say the remaining useful life is if you haven't done a condition assessment, okay? Now, let's just understand the philosophy. And look, I'm talking broadly in different types of infrastructure, but let's just talk the principle through. What you've got is, if you look in the top left-hand corner, you've got your construction of the asset, and over time, the expected useful life, you're going to The concepts are for maintenance. All you're doing is you're going to take some action to make sure that it remains in a state that it functions as intended. Periodic maintenance is going to be a form of preventative maintenance where you're going to do it on a regular basis. Like, for example, if you have generators, you need to go and test them. You've got to check that they're functioning correctly. There's not fuel blockage lines, all sorts of things. And you can put a maintenance schedule where every 6 months or year, these are the things that are checked. Then you're going to have your planned schedule maintenance is carried out in accordance with a specified time schedule. So we have shutdowns of Eskom plant where it operates for a number of years, and then you need to do a shutdown. Like you've got the Lesotho Highlands, if you live in Johannesburg, the water is going to be cut out because you need to do the maintenance of the tunnel lining. So they're going to stop the water coming through to South Africa to do that. So that's done every so many years, and it's the scheduled or planned maintenance. Then you've got rehabilitation is work required to repair, possibly upgrade an existing structure. And then renewal is complete restoration. Now, if we look at a lot of the roads we've got, I live in Johannesburg. I think we've got a lot of our roads are so potholed that they're not going to be patched anymore. We're going to have to renew it, which is a very expensive exercise. So that's the different terms. And the idea is over the useful life, if you do an intervention like your rehabilitation or your refurbishment or whatever you want to call it, you're going to go for a period of time, do it, and then you're going to have an extension of extended life. Eventually, you're going to have to say we've come to the end of life and then get rid of it. The other thing you've got to also be careful about is you've got different components would have different lifespans. So, for example, the structure might be designed to last 100 years, but we're going to replace the roof sheeting at some stage. I think of there's a 700-year-old rope bridge in South America where it was built many years ago by the Incas and things like that, and they replace it every 2 years. That's the lifespan of it. So everything has a lifespan, and depending upon that, we're going to have different components in buildings and different components that are going to have different activities at different times. And that's why it's important to understand what the asset is to break it down in terms of all of that. So if we looked at expected useful life, and just to play around with some of these concepts that we can just sort of see how they all come together, we could grade it a grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can have an excellent condition down to a very poor condition. And what we can do is we can have a description of what it is. Like excellent would be sound structure, well maintained. Good is serves needs but minor deterioration. And what you can do is you can give an indicative remaining useful life. So the idea of the asset register is if you know the condition, you know what the useful life is, you know what actions and activities you need to do, and therefore you can plan and budget for it. Okay? How do you do that without that? You're flying in the dark. You're flying in the, very, very much in the dark. Now, when we play around with this, is if you look at the remaining useful life, in some assets, they go down in the bottom curve where you have sort of like a very slow degradation. In others, it rapidly deteriorates. Now, if you don't know your condition, your assets, your conditions, you could be on that curve. And that's where we have failing infrastructure. I think I've lived in the same house for 43 years or so in Johannesburg, and we've never had water problems until fairly recently. But the water system was put in 60 years ago, and we're coming to end of useful life? Or do we need a lot more maintenance? All of those things are now starting to come to the fore. So our aging infrastructure becomes a problem. And it's not just here. I can remember many years ago, the sort of theme in America was Rebuild America, because we're sitting on a ticking time bomb. If we don't look after our infrastructure, it suddenly goes. And then we have a problem. Then everybody screams and shouts. So that's why it's very important to be informed and to provide modeling and advance warning. For example, like I was talking to a bridge engineer the other day, and he was saying that he's going around the provinces doing the bridge inspections because they haven't been done for 10, 15 years. Problem. Yep.
Can I also just say, maybe segue it to the Department of Water and Sanitation, where there's a huge issue in terms of managing the assets that are there, in terms of dams. And we've seen the devastating effects of it because there is no real maintenance of it,
Well,
closing
Riverside.
of
What
the
was it?
dams.
Riverside, Riversdale in the Cape? That
Yeah,
went?
Husfontein, Rivers.
Yeah.
It's all very devastating. And I think it's because the government or the department does not have its finger on the pulse. We don't know the lifespans of these dams. We do not know, in terms of renovation and rehabilitation, what the department needs to do. And what it has in fact done is that it has affected communities around it. And I think the worst thing about it is that some dams are even unknown, and they are depending now on the general public to report them. So that level of not having that intelligence at the level of the department disadvantages us, and we are unable to make informed decisions as the client.
Exactly, and that's avoidable. That's what's so terrible about it. And we've got so much legislation around health and safety, yet we don't seem to pay attention to it. So 100%. I think that's what illustrates it, and I'll show you. I think it's the so if we look at the condition assessments, and then I'll come to the very problem that you were talking about to give you an illustrative slide. I pulled this out of the Department of Education or Higher Education have used a cost norm for buildings for many, many years. And it's been used since 1996. And what the idea is, you do a costing of the current cost of buildings. Because you see, if you don't have a current value and you take a historic value, we built the thing 30 years ago, you can't use that as a percentage to say what your infrastructure costs are. So they have a cost norm. If you go into any of the universities, all the buildings are split up into assignable square meterage, which in other words is what is the purpose for which the building is used. You have a costing that you can apply to it, and you can rapidly come to a current estimate of costs. So what would then happen is you can see if you need minor renovation, you need a replacement cost as a percentage of replacement cost, 5% going up to 60%. So in other words, if you come and do your condition assessment of buildings and you know what the current replacement cost is, you have a basis for making informed decisions. Okay, so that's how that one works. Now, I come to the SAICI report card, infrastructure report card. I presume you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, I'll send it to NOLA, and I'll get it, if you can circulate it to people. This is the South African Institution of Civil Engineers. They've produced in 2006, 2011, 2017, 2022, every 5 years, they have released a report card. Now, the way in which they do it is, look, the institution has membership of about 12,000 engineers, and what they do is they try and use the experience. So it's not someone going out and doing condition assessments, but to come up with what a decision from a collective would give as an indication of the condition of our infrastructure. And it's not just done in South Africa. America does it. I think the UK do it, and a couple of other places. But the idea is to give decision makers an independent indicator of what the temperature looks like. So what they've done is they have produced an A to an E. And if you go into the document, they've spelt out what they mean by these various definitions. But what you've got is world class is A, fit for the future is B, C is satisfactory for now, infrastructure condition is acceptable, although stressed at peak periods. D is at risk of failure, infrastructure not coping with demand and is poorly maintained. E is unfit for purpose, infrastructure has failed or is on the verge of failure, exposing the public to health and safety risks. Okay? The idea then is they take it through a number of different asset classes and then give their ratings. And they've done it over a period of, well, it's the fourth one they've done, and they have quite a comprehensive write-up as to what the justification, why they arrived at that conclusion. And it's purely meant to initiate conversation, if you're with me. And if you look at that, and we look at the overall score for infrastructure was a D+, which basically means you're somewhere between risk of failure and satisfactory for use. In 2011, we went slightly up, and we're back in 22. So if from 2006 to 2022, we haven't really changed our infrastructure profile, which is serious. If we now look at the different areas, you've got the A minus, which is world class, is Gautrain. Why do they give A minus? Because it's starting to age. It starts needing some kind of maintenance and other kind of stuff. And if you look at, if you traveled Gauteng, I haven't done it recently, but it's starting to look around the edges a bit shabby. You've got to do something about it. I'm not being critical, I'm just using it as illustration. Sunrail with the national roads is a B+. They seem to have done a lot of maintenance, a lot of condition assessments, etc. So I don't think any of these would be surprises to anyone. As you go down it, you've got your fishing ports, oil and gas pipelines. Now remember, the Transnet pipeline was only completed fairly recently, so once again, it's new infrastructure. You've got to think about new versus old. And you can see a B is given to that. International, the information and communication technology is all new. Although what I've become to learn is in 7 years, a lot of your systems are so outdated, you've got to start replacing them very, very rapidly. Certainly at universities, it's one of the things we've found. Because your licenses expire, the software's changed, etc. We've got B- is the AXA-owned airports, commercial ports, heavy haul rail freight lines. Now we come down, and I've highlighted in bold the buildings because public works is very much around buildings. So if you looked at the university infrastructure, the average is C+. We've got some very well maintained and some very bad. So that's the sort of across the sector. Okay. So C+ is okay. Satisfactory for now, but what happens is when you've had NSFAS funding and all these other kind of issues, you cut the capital budget. The capital budget gets cut. The first thing that goes is maintenance, unfortunately. We then have a look at some of the others, the ones that really start. Sanitation for major urban areas is a C-, but look at the D+. Hospitals, public ordinary schools, TVET colleges. We're on that curve going down. We've got bulk water services, what you raised about water and sanitation. There are your bulk water services. Bulk water would be your dams, it would be included in that. Your water supply in other than urban areas, provincial, municipal paved roads, Eskom generating infrastructure. We're on a curve. If you've ever traveled, I went down to, came back from Maseru, I went down to Maseru, and I went by road because I couldn't get an air flight. I thought I'd do that. And I saw these beautiful roads in the Free State. I turned off the national road instead of going to Bloemfontein and across. Couldn't believe it. It's quite horrendous, the roads that are there. And so this is reflecting it as well. And now we come to the E, is what is failing is sanitation other than major urban areas, provincial, municipal, PRASA, railway lines, all these kind of things. Very sad state to be in. So I'll send you a copy of that report. It's purely for discussion purposes, if you understand what I mean. That's what the institution wanted, to sort of give people a bit of a wake-up call. This is what our infrastructure is. It describes in detail why they arrived at that, so you can read it yourself and get some sort of sense of it. But I don't think any of this really jars with what you experience on average. Okay, so what this is actually saying is maintenance doesn't matter. And I don't think we can live with that. It does matter because our infrastructure is going to go, and we're going to get to a stage when we start replacing infrastructure. What do we do then? Because we're going to cut new works, and I think this is where, are we providing more infrastructure for our disadvantaged communities? But how do we maintain our economic infrastructure? I think there are challenges ahead. Okay, we come to service life planning. Okay, service life planning is we're taking, sorry, I was just thinking about it. We stop at 1 o'clock, is it? Yeah, okay. Just getting myself orientated. User expectations, if we look at service life planning, what we've got is the user expectations, level of service is going to inform our strategic planning. And I think that's what you were saying, putting a standard processes in place would certainly help to regularize what the users want, because users can have very different opinions. That goes into your strategic planning. Then you've got your service level review process, and then you've got your asset management process. And remember, it's also fueled by a lot of legislation, and that's where you've got to consider the asset solutions. And I think this is becoming very important because we're great on wanting to new build. We're not really wanting to do repurposing and use our existing infrastructure. We've done some studies, and don't quote me on the figures, but it sort of gives you a sense of where it's at. We've looked at, for example, like universities building and needing more building. Now, if you change behavior, because most of you, if you've ever been to universities, each little faculty or school has its own empire. This is my building, and I don't want anyone else to use my facilities. I'm sure you've come across that. Now, if you actually analyze the occupancy of and the usage of lecture theatres, we've got such an oversupply if you change the behavior. So we've got to start thinking more and more about non-asset solutions. There's a good non-asset solution. Some of the universities are down to about, if you actually look at utilization of facilities, are sitting between 20 and 30%. Which basically means they shouldn't be building anything new for a long time to come if you repurpose. There's also the whole aspect of repurposing buildings, taking and saying, well, we used it for this, but can we use it for something else instead of building a new building? So that all comes as part of considering the non-asset solutions. And so what we've got to try and do is demand management of what we're going to build with new. We need to consider non-asset solutions, and you can only do that if you know what your assets are. So it's the chicken and the egg again. So you consider asset solutions, maintain, renew, repurpose, upgrade, dispose of, create new assets, or you're going to use your demand management in terms of reusing assets and things like that. Now, the issue with service life planning there is you can see the costs go up. You've got an initial cost, You're then going to go through your regular maintenance cost. Now you're going to come to renewal, big kick up, and so it goes on. So you've got to start thinking about your disposal as to when are you going to get rid of assets. So service life planning would come out of the asset register. The condition assessments would then allow you to do service life planning. So if we sort of wrapped up on the asset management side of things, what we've got is asset management would be the documented information that specifies the activity, resources, and timescales required for an individual asset or a group of assets to achieve the organization's asset management objectives. So if we had that asset management plan, you can now allocate budgets to it because you can prioritize it, you can do everything. But if you don't have that plan, and if it is not credible and it is not reliable, we have a problem. And I think that's, if I look across the country, I think that's where we're sitting at. And something major has got to happen in terms of our assets because we're on the downhill. Okay, so then that would mean this comes to your short, medium, and long term. The general operations, what do we need to do this year? What do we need to do in 3 to 5 years? And what do we need to do in the 10 to 30 years? And we need to have an understanding of that in terms of moving forward. The critical infrastructure needs, because this is the decision making that you're going to make from your service life plans. If you've got your asset management plans, now you need to think about what are the critical important assets that can be identified by considering the consequences of failure. So this is where it all comes down to, is the what ifs. If this doesn't occur, like we've had the Free State roads that have collapsed in the rural areas, what is the impact of that? The farmers can't get produce to markets. It becomes a food security issue. So it's all these interrelationships, because remember the point I made right in the beginning is that infrastructure serves a business objective or an objective of government. So we've got to look at what is going to happen when this doesn't occur. So we've got to also look about the consequences of failure in terms of the public, employees' health and safety, additional costs of deferring repair, impact on the service delivery and image of the entity, and the effect on the environment. I found it quite horrifying going into, like, even if you just take little things, you go into the union buildings. What do you see in union buildings? Roof leaks. Why haven't they been fixed? I mean, Exactly. All of these kind of things. And you see like a lot of our older buildings and historic buildings were built at a time where, you see, if you understand building regulations apply at the time you get planning permission. If you alter, your altering goes to the new standard, but you're not required to upgrade from the old standard. However, in terms of occupational health and safety, your fires have changed, and what was in the 1920s considered adequate for fire is no longer considered adequate for fire. So in terms of building regulations, you may not need to update, but in terms of health and safety regulations, you're going to have to take a view on it. So there's so many different drivers, and that's an example, as you say, with Parliament, is not keeping up to date with what the fire requirements and how things have changed. Risks are events which can cause failure to achieve objectives. Remember, that was the uncertainty that we spoke about in terms of objectives. So if you have an understanding of what your condition is and what you need to do to upgrade it to an acceptable condition, you can make risk-based decisions on it and prioritize what you need to do. Objectives can be set by the organization, and those can be political and technical. because I think asset management is not all about the engineering. Engineering will tell you the science and give you the basic plan, but people need to make decisions as to what priorities are, and we've got hard choices to make. Assessment of criticality helps us focus on resources, and there's just some suggestions is identification of critical assets, the questions to be asked, and I think this might be helpful for you when you meet with organizations to ask these awkward questions. These are the basic questions they should be asking. Is what are the assets associated risks to achieving the organization's objectives, particularly with respect to sustainable service delivery at agreed levels of service? There's one question. If they don't have an agreed level of service, you know straight away, and so on. I'm just saying there's some good things here. What requirements does legislation place on the organization? That's the health, safety, and environment. What might happen, where, and what is the likelihood, what is the probability of a failure occurring? What would be the effect or would be affected? The social impact. Reputational damage is a big issue. I mean, I think that parliamentary fire and losing parliament was a hell of a reputational damage. That was a real slap on the wrists, you know. What would be the cost of consequences, financial impact? What level of risk is the organization willing to or able to accept? And what mitigating actions could be taken to reduce the risk? So those are the base. I mean, this is not rocket science, but if you haven't got data, you cannot make informed decisions. And I think that's the point. So if we then looked at the delivery process, what we've got to do is, and as I said to you, the asset management people need to get together with the designers. This doesn't often happen, but it's the way in which we should start looking at it, because otherwise you're over-designing or under-designing. You're paying a premium, and you can pay a premium on the design, or you can pay a premium on the maintenance. And so this is where the two have got to be sorted out. And, you know, particularly with buildings now, if we're looking at buildings, some of the highest costs of buildings in operation is electrical usage, usage of power, and usage of water. Now, if that is not discussed in the design and it's not taken care of, you're going to have huge, you know, costs later on in the day. So it's those kind of discussions. But once again, it requires a knowledgeable client. Yeah, all of that. And so when we come to the asset management, it's not a question of we have to have a big bang approach and suddenly overnight we have to have everything perfect. It's a journey that can start, and if you start by just identifying your assets, running through some of the issues that we've been talking around, some of the questions, you can build it up. Because at the end of the day, the more effort you put into it, the more reliable, the more credible it becomes. But there is a law of diminishing returns. You can overcook it and not get the results that you need. So it's trying to find the balance in all of that. I'm going to move on to planning and budgeting, but have you got a good grasp of the asset management principles and processes before I move on? Yeah, because then I'll take you through, after lunch, we'll go into the Guiama Act and start seeing how it fits in with all of this. I think it is compatible as far as I can see, but we can discuss that. I think the problem is people are just not doing the technical side of it. Okay, so now we come to the key planning and budgeting processes. So what I've done is I've looked at, there's two types of processes that we're going to go through with planning. Once you've decided that you have a project to look at, because remember, every project that you get, you're going to have to commit some resources to it to further develop it. You can't make a decision right up front when someone says, here's a proposal. Proposal is just a high-level business case. So as I said to you, the first stage in our process, you're going to go through your strategic planning, which is going to be informed primarily by your asset management system. particularly in the municipalities, that drives everything. Because in your asset management system, you're going to identify new buildings that you need to be put in or new infrastructure. And you're also going to have what you're going to have to maintain, what you're going to have to refurbish, and when. So the strategic planning would go from that into a project inception. In other words, I have identified a project and I have a high-level business case on it, and a decision can be made. No, it doesn't fit what we're doing. Let's can it right from the beginning, or hold on, we need to process it through a project preparation process. Now, the very big projects are going to go through a further business case development. So I would suggest that in the process, when you've got a high-level inception report, you should be saying, what direction are we going to go? Do we need to do a further development of a business case, or can we put it into our pipeline of projects and start processing it? Now, it's quite important. I heard the Auditor General talk earlier in the year and was saying that they were having difficulty of even finding business cases for some of the projects that were actually delivered. And I think this is so important, because the accountability is, why did we build that clinic? Why did we build that? What was the justification? It has to be documented and it has to be looked at. That is part of accountability. So if you need a full business case development, you're going to go through a process which I will talk you through, but that is going to applies primarily to clients who have high value, complex projects where private funding is required, or public-private partnerships typically. And that's, at the moment, goes through the Infrastructure South Africa in the way in which it's been conceptualized. If it doesn't go into that route and you don't require a massively developed infrastructure plan, at least business plan, you're going to go into what I would call a project pipeline, where in the project pipeline, you're going to, and we'll take you through some detail, you'll identify the needs prioritized in terms of extent of impact. And that's quite a key consideration, because you can have a wonderful project, but it doesn't impact upon communities, and it doesn't have much public value. And I think this is part of the prioritization that you've got to say is, if I've got limited resources, what's the best bang for my buck? And so that would be part of that screening process in prioritization. So yes, it might be a project that you required, but what is the extent of impact? So like we can have a road in the Free State, and the impact is it's going to hit food security, it's going to not allow exports, it's going to cripple that area economically. We can see what the impact is. You can have a nice fancy statue put up in a park in Sandton. So what? Exactly. So that's where the impact comes in, and the potential consequences of not doing the work. I think that's the other side we've got to say is, what if we don't do this work? What is the impact going to be? You're then going to go through, so you've now aligned with broader objectives. Then you're going to go through what I would call a project preparation, where one of the biggest problems I think we've had, why we have such delays in projects, is we haven't done proper preparation. We say, look, in the same financial year, we want you to plan it, design it, construct it, and complete it. The rush, particularly around, I think we're going to have the rush in 2 years' time with the municipal elections. Everybody wants it out there. And the problem is then you start the project and you realize, oops, we need an environmental license. We need all those kind of things which do take time, and they are necessary. I'm not saying they're not necessary, but we need to get a project ready for implementation. To me, the trick is to have the top slice your budget so that you've got some allocation to prepare projects, to make them ready, that when you pull them into the year that you're going to do it, they're ready to go. You've got rid of those impediments. So the idea of that would be, you'd have your resolution of impediments, and then you're going to have some kind of preliminary assessment, and then you're going to have to, and you'd also have to get a refinement in costs, because, you know, sometimes these projects were thought of many years ago and they've got to be updated in terms of cost and expectations. And sometimes when they're motivated, they may not have had the professional advice on what the values are. You're then going to have to put it in a pipeline, and you're then going to have to start sieving it and take it to the governance of the organization to decide which ones they're going to go with. And so that's where it goes back into that flow of information that we did for delivery management. Okay, that's just at a high level. So now we come to demand management or strategic planning. So what I've tried to do is to craft what the principles should be. And when we come to Guyama, I think there would be alignment with these principles. I think we're great in South Africa on the principles, and the legislation is fantastic, but we're very bad on the implementation, I think, generally. So if we look at the demand for infrastructure should be managed through asset management plans, which provide a credible forecast of current and net demand for the services or requirements for functionality over a period of maybe, say, let's say 10 years. And those should be informed by current performance against desired levels of performance, cost estimates of the life cycle activities. So the starting point in planning is to have the asset management plan. And you can't have your asset management plan if you haven't got your asset management register, you haven't got your service life plans, you haven't done your condition assessments. All of those things lead to credible plans. If you're thumb sucking, it's not necessarily credible, and you may not have the right answers. You might do the wrong projects. Okay? So that's the first principle of demand management. The second is to base demand on the following principles. Infrastructure should be used efficiently and become surplus to requirements and disposed of or repurposed if it does not support its service delivery objectives or the institution's strategic objectives at an efficient level, and it cannot be upgraded to that level. So that's the principle. We can't just hold on to infrastructure indefinitely. We can get rid of it. We can dispose of it. And just always be careful if you get a donation of property and say, look, we'll give it to you. Find out what the risks are. We had in Kimberley, De Beers, when they divested from Kimberley, they decided to give all their land and assets and the whole lot to Solplaatje University. We did a due diligence test, check, and we realized we were only going to inherit they were trying to dump their liabilities onto you. So you've got to be very careful with what infrastructure you take on and what infrastructure you get rid of. There's liabilities. Then we've got to look at the alternate service delivery models or solutions that do not require infrastructure or reduce the demand for infrastructure. Like, to give you an idea of reducing the demand for infrastructure, let's just take water, for example. You can have free water up to so many kiloliters per household, and then you have a stepped tariff that goes up, that if you really want to use water to water your gardens and all the rest of it, you're going to pay through your teeth in it. And that then starts curbing back the demand. So one has got to look at all these different things to try and not automatically go for infrastructure. If we're looking from a sustainability point of view, the best solution is to build nothing. But unfortunately, that's not going to help our development. And so we've got to find what is going to work. Then we need to look at also improving efficiencies, reducing peak demand, repurposing, prioritizing alternatives, and changing behavior. And so all of those things have got to be thought through. I mean, even if you look at like the electricity and things like that, we used to have many years ago, I've lived in Randburg for years, I remember about 30 years ago, they introduced in every house that when peak demand came, they could cut the geysers out. and push a button, cut the geysers, drop the demand, then you didn't have to build new infrastructure. It was cheaper to adopt those kind of solutions. So one has got to think through all of that, the cost of infrastructure as well as the operational and maintenance costs. You know, we built, if you remember the Nelson Mandela Hospital, Children's Hospital that was built. Where did they have to operate it? Where did they have the money to, you know, to bring staff in? It stood empty for a hell of a long time because it hadn't been budgeted for the operation and management of it. So one has got to think through all of these things because you've got to staff it, you've got to run it, and all those kind of costs come into it as well. Infrastructure that is currently used shall be kept operational to function in a manner that supports safe and efficient use. We don't want liabilities that you're running unsafe and people start suing because of unsafe conditions. Okay. Infrastructure shall be disposed of and decommissioned when no longer required or fails to provide best use of funds, is financially unsustainable, or other methods of achieving the services can be done. So would you agree those are good principles to do your demand management? But if you don't have asset management in place, you're flying blind. Okay? So with your inception report, you're going to, as I said to you, it's going to either cascade into the prioritization of projects within a pipeline, the resolution of impediments, or perform preliminary project selection, or prepare cost estimates and schedule. Now, if you have a business case that needs to be developed, and my understanding of a business case is the documented justification to support decision-making about the commitment to the project. Now, as we spoke yesterday, it's not just about the infrastructure we're building, it's what is the outcomes of that infrastructure, what are its impacts, what are its benefits, what is its public value. All of that should be documented in the business case. Because if you don't have a well-documented business case, how do you brief a project team to put the project together, particularly where you've got people from the private sector that are providing services? They have no direction. They weren't part of that. They don't know about that. But if they know about that and they want to meet their clients' demands, they'll make a plan and do that. I've found with contractors that if you have a very clear vision of what you want to do, you've put it into their contracts, you meet with them, you discuss with them, we've seen some stunning results, what people have done, have used their imagination. When we built the universities, and I'm talking about this as 2013, 2014, we decided to have skills development to allow people to develop their skills towards nationally accredited outcomes, which is what the CIDB is now doing. We did the forerunner of that. And we sat down with the contractors and said, look, this is what we want to achieve. Now, will you guys work with us? They came up with plans, and we can show you the first phase of the building. We spent 1.6 billion rand. We had 500 and something odd people. These are the names of the people that got qualifications. This is what they achieved. And it was a widespread. They actually went and met with some of their staff, and some of their staff got professionally registered. Others were bringing in from the communities. And people went back into the communities in saying, but this is a community project. But you see, that wouldn't have happened without leadership, without getting the contractors on board. I've learned people want to please their clients for continued business, but we have to communicate it. But if you don't have a business case and you don't have it locked in, it's not a value to the project and nobody is going to track it. So when we come to the business case development, Infrastructure South Africa uses, and I'll describe it in a bit more detail, but just for the moment, is a 5-level business case. Now, where this comes from is we part of the G20 nations, And G20 came out with project preparation principles, and the UK government has come out with an international guidance, not just for the UK, it's an international document on a 5-case model. And it's very comprehensively put together, trying to probe all the issues that should be considered. So if you look at the strategic, first of all, you've got to look at the strategic case. Why is the project necessary? And it's not just, I need the infrastructure. It's what is that infrastructure going to do? What are the knock-on effects? What is the public value? What is all of those kind of things? Documented. The economic case just determines how the project will deliver the economic, social, and environmental objectives. So you have to build into your business case right up front what those objectives are, while achieving the most value for money for society or public value from the investment. There it is. Then you've got the commercial case, demonstrates that the project is commercially viable. In other words, it makes economic sense. Then we have a financial case that demonstrates that the capital investment and operating costs are affordable from public and or private resources, and that sufficient allowance has been made for risk management, monitoring, and unexpected events. Remember we spoke yesterday about contingencies? Okay. Now, interestingly enough, in planning, I haven't mentioned it in the notes here, but it's just something that I remembered. What people say is the reason for project failures. You were talking about cost and time, so many projects being out. It's because of something called, there's 2 things that cause it, or 3 things. The first is called optimism bias. Okay? Optimism bias is looking at something in the most positive light. Now, if you speak to an engineer, and I'm an engineer, is the glass half full or half empty? I will always tell you half full. I can do the project for that price. You see what I mean? The estimates are we overestimate. We want to get the project going, so what we're going to do is we're going to be optimistic and ignore some of the risks. You with me? The UK government has what they call, their Treasury has got a green book, and what they do is when you apply for funding, they say to you, what is your track record in delivering those projects? Because if you haven't done those projects before, or you don't have a track record, they add an optimism bias to it. So for example, and I'm just mentioning this just as illustrative, I looked at the oil pipeline, Durban to Joburg, and that one went up quite dramatically in costs from when people put the application before. I'm not talking about the terminals, I'm just talking about the pipeline itself. And if you looked at the NERSA application and then you looked at the construction costs, it went up dramatically. But in mitigation, at no point in time it was started too early before they'd got the land assembly sorted out. So you had a stop-start construction. At no point in time did you have unrestricted access for construction. So you know what that's going to do? You start here, then you've got to move somewhere else. And a lot of it was because Transnet had for 50 years not built a pipeline. We had a change in legislation around land, the new constitution, different processes, so you underestimated the processes. Now the point I'm making here, if I took the estimates that were given to NERSA and I applied the optimism bias, I came out at more or less the answer as to what it was constructed for. So you see there's an overestimate. We don't have proper estimates. So if you play with so optimism bias is one area. The other is strategic misrepresentation. And that can occur politically, and it can also occur within departments. We want this project to run. And so there will be manipulation around that this is the best project. I'm sure we're going to have it in the energy, like the nuclear and all the rest of it and things like this. There is that element in it. The third thing is what they call is it's persisting in the same line. In other words, the governing body digs their heels in. This is the way we're going to do it, and we're not going to listen to anything else. So you're escalating all the time a commitment to a project that you shouldn't be doing. So those are the sort of three major areas worldwide. And if you're interested, I can give you a paper on that that sets out some of the things as to what to watch out for. So a lot of our figures that we've got for starting and for time periods are wrong from the start for a number of reasons. And that's why it's important in the planning process to try and screen some of these things out and add in larger contingencies. Does that make sense? So part of these business cases should be looking at that. And then the final one is the management case. That defines the project delivery team and demonstrates that it has the right skills and experience, appropriate governance, and a realistic project delivery plan. So that comes back to the delivery management. My argument is you can have the best bankable project investment, and if you don't have the team that can deliver it, what is the value of your investment plan? We've got to fix a number of things. It's not just a quick fix up front. It's that delivery and getting it done. And look, we've had fantastic projects delivered in this country. It's not a case that we can't. I think it's just a case of getting the right skills mixes together and the right governance structures to do things. Like, for example, we can complain about Eskom and Medupi and things like that, but someone pointed out, and I might not have the right figures, but they had something like between the start of Medupi to the end, something like 12 to 14 changes in CEO. Now, with all those leadership changes, there's no consistency in governance, there's no consistency in decision making. It's not surprising we have some problems. You with me? So there's a lot of things we can look at, and this is a very good business case model that if you do it correctly, it's a very thorough analysis of what you should be delivering. So if we go to the project pipeline, what we're going to do through the project pipeline is we're going to put projects into it. We're then going to go through the needs identification, a planning alignment, the impediments identified, preliminary projects, approved projects. So we should be funneling it down that when we come to put it into our project management plan for a financial year, we've got projects that are capable of running. And I think this is a big frustration to like municipal councillors. They go and tell their community, we're going to have this project done, and then 3 years later, it's still stuck. So it's all about getting this pipeline going that when things come, you can unlock it and you can run with it. Certainly what I've worked with universities, some universities have taken the sort of 2-3% of what the total budget would be to do the forward planning, that if funding becomes available, they can snap it up like that because they're in a position to rapidly advance. So we've always got to do a little bit of that upfront work to make sure that we've got projects that when budget becomes available, we can run. Obviously, you're not going to design the full thing because you're spending money without having it, but you have to take some kind of top slice for project preparation. The end outcome of the project pipeline is a reservoir of approved projects that are ready to go at a reasonably short notice. And I'm sure you've heard, the problem is we've got planning, we don't have shovel-ready projects and all the rest of it to roll. It's got to have a culture in organizations to have stuff ready, have it that we can, when funding becomes available, we don't miss the opportunities. Because if we look back, and I didn't show it yesterday, but if you look back, we underspend every year on our budget. So Treasury revises our budget downwards, we go downwards, we go downwards. And it's not a question of money, it's a question of capability to deliver proper projects. I think that's, in my view, where we need to focus. The ready-to-go timeline is determined primarily by how far the project has progressed along the pipeline. Now, one of the other things about cost things, I didn't put it in the slide, but it just struck me now, is the costing of projects is a function of how far the design has been developed. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that because our accuracy of estimates at the very start is very rough because we haven't done detailed design or even conceptual designs. So that's one of the things we also need to recognize, that we may have changes in budgets due to design development. We then come to project identification and alignment. The deliverable is, yeah.
You continuously raise the issue of, the scope of projects changing midstream and all of that. Do you not feel that if there's sufficient planning done by experts, right, in determining a project and its scope, that they should not be this case? I mean, we shouldn't be taking this for granted.
It should be a small 5%.
It should be a small,
like that.
yeah.
No, 100% agreed with you. But you see, one of the other problems that occurs is if you don't manage the scope creep, everybody starts adding in. This is my project. It's like a crocodile. Let's just add this, add this. So it's a two-phase thing. No, it's not good management. It comes down to the function of management. And I think part of the problem, certainly the sort of slogan that I've tried to get going with universities to control some of their costings is you see, we've got to change the culture from pay for what is designed to design a project for a budget. It's two different things. And you see, this is where if we've got proper planning, we can have a realistic value of what that project should be. Then when you design the project, if you go outside that level, you trim it at that stage back to that level. You with me? So it's all about a culture change, because the way we've got at the moment is a lot of it is if a client is ill-formed and doesn't know what the project value is, he gives it to a design team who run wild on it and trying to get design for what is designed, pay for. Whereas we've got to move it back to the others. I mean, like, to give you an idea of how some of these things have gone with poor strategies, and I'm just saying in the past, like if we take the 2010 stadiums that were built, I looked at Greenpoint Stadium, and I was then assisting the CIDB, and they were asked to look at, with some of the Department of Public Works, to explain to the Minister of Public Works why the stadiums were so expensive and over-designed. Now, Greenpoint Stadium, to put it in perspective, if you took the cost per seat, was the same as an RDP house. Per seat. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, now the roof. Now, this is where, if you want to see the unintelligent client at work, here is one of them. Now, look, I mean, Cape Town is pretty intelligent, but what I'm saying is, when I went in, I asked one question, because I had open access for 2 days to their records. All I asked for was, what was the design brief? The design brief that was given to the designers was build a world-class iconic stadium to host the semi-final of the 2010 World Cup, full stop. Didn't say for a budget of. And I can remember being in the minister's chambers that evening, explaining to the Deputy Minister of Finance and the Minister why it was so expensive, because, I mean, she quite correctly said, have a look at all the buildings around here and you look at that stadium with the glass roof. She raised the issue of, why did you have to have a glass roof? Where else in the world? and the German designer was there. And he said, "You wanted the world-class iconic stadium? We gave it to you." And he's correct. He fulfilled his brief. Yes. Now, the other thing that came out of that, which was also a bit humorous, but it paints the picture, when they did the fast track, they went out with a bad procurement strategy, and this was all the stadiums. They used a traditional building contract with provisional sums, estimates, okay? They had, I met with most of the teams before the tenders closed, and they had 70% of the work was provisional sums. So I tried to put a presentation together to explain to the minister that it was bad guesses and all the rest of it, but not being an official, I didn't present. And my presentation was made by one of the managers in Public Works who did a much, much better job than I ever did. He just stopped in the middle of this explanation, looked at the minister in the face and said, basically, it's a pay-as-you-go system. That's no planning, no controls. You can deliver. We delivered in Kimberley using different methods with a very strong client leadership, with 70% of the work unknown, because we had changing clients. You cannot finalize a building until you know the academic program. We had 3 changes in clients while we were under construction. So we built the shell, but we couldn't finish the interior. With 70% out, using strong management and correct techniques, we still came within 2% of starting price. Can be done. It's the way in which it's put together and the way in which it's managed from a client point of view. Okay? So I think that's the big issues that one has got to look at. It comes back to management. Okay? So if we look through here, you've got to look at your benefits and risks associated with each project to determine what will be the key factors when prioritizing limited resources. This could look at base risk, reach, impacts, all of those kind of things that come out, which would inform priority and interdependencies, where the ability to fully utilize one asset is dependent upon another. Cost benefit studies, including financial, delivery methodology, and more, the social and economic impacts are creeping in as well, making a big reasoning for project selection. And that's the benefits, desirability analysis is also important, and so on. So that's where the planning is so critical, and the discussions we had yesterday about some of the frustration in not seeing projects deliver on social and economic side of things is because we haven't done the proper planning and bring it all together. So the project preparation, we would also look at the impediments. And I think this is important to understand, that when we are building, you can't just switch the tap on very quickly. You've got quite a lot of processes to go through. So one has got to look at servitude, ownership, and acquisition. And that can take time. Land usage, zoning, town planning restrictions. All of those things have got to be looked up right up front, and it might take some time to get rid of them. So that's part of your project preparation, that you're making sure that you're getting rid of these, that they're ready to go. The presence of informal dwellings on the site. How are you going to deal with that? It's not just a case you can put a bulldozer in. You've got to look at alternatives. There's all sorts of things. The environmental and legislative approvals. The bulk service provisions. You know, if you don't have your bulk services, you can't do anything. Like, for example, Pretoria University here cannot expand their campus because the city can't provide them with bulk services. It's a constraint. So one has got to look at all of those kind of things and screen projects that projects run, then we will spend our budgets. But if we've got projects that are on our pipeline that we're trying to build this year and we've got these impediments, it's a no-brainer. That's why we're not going to get there. So those all need to be sorted out. Project feedback is important, just to close the loop. The project feedback that comes in is, if we want to know what costs are, what the problems are, what the best solutions are. Get the feedback from the project teams. Get the closeout reports. The closeout report should tell you what the costings are and try and break it down that we can use that to forecast future costs. So that's a critical element as well. I'm sort of coming to the end of this presentation, but what I wanted to just come back to is your public procurement system in terms of the Public Procurement Act. If we look at it, I hope you now got a better understanding of when we talk about demand management. I really would like to see the regulations or whatever that's going to be put in place for demand management needs to be linked to asset management. We were talking about putting new legislation in place. We can do it through here. The legislation is there. We just need to write the regulations that people understand that this is not about bin levels in a store. This is about asset management, that you need to do your asset management, to have an asset management plan to form the basis of your planning. Would that make sense? So I'm not sure we need new legislation. We just need to make sure that the regulations and the various pieces of, talk to each other. And if I took that just further, if we looked at it, we could say the standard processes for asset management, CIDB could put in place. We could go to the Council for the Built Environment and we could say to them that in your categories of registration, why don't we have asset management professionals? I'm just talking aloud, if you know what I mean. I'm just saying is we've got various instruments, and if we stitch them together across it, we don't have to wait for 3 years for a parliamentary process to go through. And I'm not saying you're slow, I'm just saying legislation. I mean, how many laws have been passed by the Sixth administration that have not been signed into law? I mean, the NHBRC one was done 3 years ago. It's still not signed into law. It was passed by Parliament. So this is what I'm saying. I'm not blaming. All I'm just saying is there are ways that regulations are supposed to be used to make things quicker. And if we stitch them all together, that they're coherent, and we work together in the space, I'm sure we can do a lot. So demand management would be, we could describe it as a planning methodology used to forecast the demand for new infrastructure and the functionality of existing infrastructure in support of institutions' strategic objectives. Isn't that what it's all about? Now, if we had that in regulations, the Auditor General will say, where's your strategic objectives? Where is your plan of how you're going to support that? Done and dusted. Simple. We can also... Yeah. No, but it's only signed into law earlier this year. The regulations haven't been put in place. Yes and no, because I've followed that procurement process very closely. Treasury has always treated a one-size-fits-all to procurement. And that has been a fundamental problem that we've had. Now, in the NEDLAC process, before it, because the way the bill went out for public comment, and it said infrastructure would be separately treated, okay? What then happened is when it went into the NEDLAC process, it was back to a one-size-fits-all process. So business and labor was supporting business and labor, some other academics, professors of law, and we persuaded the NEDLAC process with businesses and labor support to say infrastructure must be regulated separately. If you look in the Act, it actually states that the minister must issue regulations for infrastructure as well as goods and services for the maintenance of infrastructure. Now, isn't that as a sector what we want? Okay. The problem now is, will Treasury do that? There is not a single built environment professional that I know of in the OCPO's office that is driving this process. So this is a process that we need to think about. How do we as a sector do it? Is there a role for CIDB to standardize process? Do we just simply dump things in? Do we as a group get involved in putting it all together? I'm just throwing the questions out. Okay?
I think what seems to be happening in the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure specifically is that there's a lack of backlog here and an impediment here in terms of constitutionality, how this entity must also be sovereign and we must respect its sovereignty. But what we are not seeing is that there isn't any political will in terms of allowing themselves to synergize their expertise to really empower this department.
Well, it comes down to leadership. So let me just sort of throw one or two things in just to sort of to think about, and I'll happily send you a little document on it. I mean, look, I'm at the stage in life where I can't make a career-threatening move. I'm 68, my career is over, okay? Right, so what I want to say to you is just if you play with looking at the legislation, because if I look at this, everything for running, the asset management can be brought into it, the budgeting and planning, the delivery management, the procurement, everything that I have spoken about today could be wrapped up in here, potentially, if the right information is put in place. If it's left to a financial function that comes in, we are dead for the next 20 years, okay?
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me just actually provide a bit of context in terms of this issue that you're raising about the development of regulations for the PP Act that has been actually signed into law recently. I think we have actually observed with keen interest, particularly in terms of the discussion that took place at NCOP, to say that the department should actually be instrumental in terms of taking a lead and give guidance, particularly with regard to the development of the regulations. We have actually formulated different streams. I think I'm actually leading that particular discussion as well. We have formulated different work streams. They've started to actually work. They are going to feed on the drafting of the regulations themselves. So that process is actually run by the Department of Public Works in consultation with.
Well, I'm very glad if that happens. But there are some other options as well, just to put on the table.
I just want to make the point, and I think it's important that we do this because there's so much of valuable information that's coming out of this engagement. I see many of our members are gone too. I don't to see many of them are gone. But I'm hoping that our support staff that are here, that we would, at the end of this workshop session, come up with a summary of the proposals that came out of this workshop. We discussed that. And then we formalize that to become part of our committee agendas. if I see an aggressive shaking of the head there, going no, is that so? Is it saying yes or saying no? It's saying no. I'd like to know why. Yeah.
The importance of this comes over many years of working with parliamentarians. And the damage you do is you make me the expert. You make me the expert. The support staff become the experts if they do the summaries. You need to empower yourself by doing it yourself and sending us your take on what happened for inclusion in the reports.
I'm sorry.
It
I
is a very
totally disagree.
serious-
I
it's a-
totally disagree. Let's start off on the correct platform here. The chairperson said we're doing business differently. All right? Support staff are meant to sit down and take notes of everything, at least. That's not our job. We are here to engage with the content, make our statements, because if I knew that this was the case, I would have been recording and writing and playing the role of a support staff. Then what is your role as support staff if that is not the case? I am still maintaining, and my honorable colleagues here that's seated here, and the DG that's here, it's a pity the chair is gone from here. If a support staff member comes up with the attitude, no, the members here must come up with their own ideas and put their ideas here and write it down, give it to us. That to me, I've never experienced previously in my life. What then is the responsibility of the support staff? Don't
It
make
is
me angry
something-
now.
It is something that you need to rethink. If you heard clearly, then you must calm down first and think about it. If you heard carefully, it's about empowering this whole session. Could I be allowed, honorable member, when you spoke, I kept quiet and listened. I'm just trying to explain something to you. I am doing my job as a support staff member by empowering you. This whole... No. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No. No, sir. You can go back to my record and see whether you see laziness. I think you must...
Doc, but
I think you need to, you need to cut it. You need to cut it.
Can you call an order on this dialogue?
Well, it's up to the chair.
If I knew that I had to keep records, I would have done that. If I knew that I had to keep the records, if I knew I had to keep records as a member of this committee, as a member of parliament, I would have been doing that all this time. I actually started doing it, and then I saw support staff. I said, that's their job. Give us a summary at the end of what our key areas are that we need to take forward into the 7th administration. Now I'm told that no, it's not the support staff's responsibility, it's ours.
Can I just move forward? I'm just the visitor here. Okay. Sorry, you want to say something? No? No?
Thank you very much, facilitator. I think what my colleague is trying to say, Honorable Reddy, is that actually, perhaps let me rather explain the process after this session. First and foremost, after every session, be it a committee meeting or an oversight visit or a public hearing for legislative processing or even a capacity building workshop, we produce a report. The report would be then, we do as the support personnel. Granted, may I please? Granted, may I please? So what we do, while we are producing those reports, we will therefore request members who have additional information that they feel should be additional to the reports that we have, so that we can augment the reports and it be a reflection of the committee. And how do we do this? We do it either during or after the workshop, or during the time in which the committee will be considering the report for adoption. That I think I've just put the matter to bed. Thank you very much.
Okay, look, let's park this one. Just what I wanted to say, just in terms of the Public Procurement Act, because I really believe that if we get this right, it would make a massive difference. However, I want to just point out to you what I have noticed in the legislation. I'm not a lawyer, so I might be wrong, but the way I see it is very clear that there has to be separate regulations for infrastructure, they said, and capital. But capital is basically infrastructure as well, part of it. So we can have separate for capital, but infrastructure, the capital portion would all be in it. What it says is separate regulations, which is great. And the regulations have got to be, all the affected departments have to agree to it, and then the Minister of Finance does it. However, if you look at the amendments to the CIDB Act, the CIDB Act has been amended that the CIDB can make procurement regulations subject to the concurrence of the Minister of Finance. So there's another route through it. And I'm not here to debate which way it goes or anything else like this. All I'm saying is there's some thinking that needs to be done as to which is the best route to get it. To me, I'm only interested in getting something that is going to work for the construction industry. I think we have a lot of talent. We have a lot of people that can put into it. But if it goes in certain directions like we've had in the past with the financial section driving it, it's not going to help. If you want to comment, that's fine, but I'm just saying to you there's different. Not the amendment bill, the current act has been done. If you have a look...
The CIDB, let me just say, the CIDB amendment bill that we are currently consulting on. I was in Cape Town last week. There is an act that we are currently amending through the amendment bill. So it is taking consideration the Procurement Act that has been passed into law by the President. So you're raising those issues. We are trying to adjust it so that it could actually speak to the act that has been passed recently. Hence we're saying the ones that we have actually gazetted, it did not actually take the provisions that have been signed into law in the act itself. But we have taken that into consideration. Ours is still in the draft format. We are amending the 2000 Act, which is in place now, and therefore we'll adjust it accordingly, and therefore it will actually also take into consideration those areas that we actually speak into.
100%. The point I'm making is forget the amendment bill. The Public Procurement Act amends the CIDB Act and makes provision for the publication of regulations by the CIDB. Minister of Finance, Minister of Public Works through the CIDB Act. All I'm saying is have a look at that section because that's in law. We don't have to wait for the other one because the other one would align. So as I see it as a lay person reading law, there's two routes. I don't know what the best one is. I'm happy to back either as long as we get the right result. So coming back just to wrap up, because I think there's two important slides that I just want to finish off on and then we'll break for lunch. I know it's been a long session. But if you look, the institutional and governance arrangements we spoke about this morning, that can be locked in. We can bring in the demand management where we've got the whole principles of asset management in there. So we don't need to bring new legislation out. We can do it through there if necessary. We can bring in the procurement planning and budgeting, and we've got risk management, disposal management. There is a good framework there that if we locked into that, we can get things going. The last slide I wanted to show you, which I think just pulls some of the things together, is the institutional functions and alignment, because this is where I keep coming back to, and I've shown that diagram before, but what I wanted to do is to take you through the principles for effective governance of all of this. This is the leadership thing. So if we go through that, is what, if you go to the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, it talks about that government would deliver projects as an enterprise. It's difficult to understand. So let's unpack what an enterprise is, okay? To have a look at what an enterprise is provide effective governance processes that contains proper management and control, including demand management. So that's the frameworks I spoke about, the control points in the process, the allocation of responsibilities from high level going downwards. That's the governance side of things. So coming back to the point I was making about, is it administration, is it management, is it governance? We've got to focus on getting the governance right. Then the PFMA will work better. We've then got all the various parts of the organization which play a role in infrastructure delivery work together in a coordinated, efficient, and effective manner. And that's where we've got there the various executive managers forming the steering committee because infrastructure is going to impact the different sections in the department. It's not just about those who are delivering infrastructure. That coordination is important to get it that, because you need to take ownership, the whole organization of the infrastructure. It's not that person's problem, it's our problem, because it's going to affect our performance. The next one down is, and this, by the way, is all in the National Planning Commission reports and been carried through into the NIP 2050. Whenever possible, manages the delivery of projects as a long-term and strategic system of individual yet interlinked projects aimed at meeting the organizational's objectives. So the whole thing needs to be pulled together. Like if you had an enterprise, the enterprise has objectives and everybody subscribes to those objectives. That's no different to what a department has got. You've got your mandate and you've got to bring everybody contributing towards it to sing on the same song sheet. Then we've got establishes clear delegations of authority, enabling timeous decision money and individual and organizational accountability. That is coming from governance down to management, to delegate managers to make decisions within the confines of the governance arrangements of the organization. Because remember, the biggest problem is indecision. The minute you've got indecision, things don't happen. If you've got and remember, time is money. If you start delaying projects by indecision, costs start accounting, time slips, all of these kind of things. And particularly where projects are linked to each other, and you've got the benefits of this is only achieved when that one is finished, it becomes hugely problematic. And then the last one is provide for the assignment of single point accountability to a suitably qualified and experienced built environment practitioner, which I'm calling the client delivery manager. I'm not necessarily saying that he has to be professionally registered with the councils or anything else like that. I'm saying someone who understands the sector and can exercise leadership. If you go into the differences between leadership and management, good managers very seldom make good leaders, because they're focusing on the detail, the nitty-gritty, whereas you should be higher up looking at what the prognosis is and how do I bring this thing back in. It's all about getting the job done, if you're with me. So so that's why I say someone needs to understand the context of infrastructure delivery. And we've got a lot of people that have come from different disciplines. Like, for example, WITS, what we're doing at the moment, we've got a new postgraduate course we brought in. We brought it in at honors level deliberately, because if we brought it in at master's level, then in terms of university rules, we'd have to have people with 4-year built environment degrees. So I've got currently lawyers that are on course, accountants, built environment people, because we brought it down recognizing people are working in that space. So if you're looking for the leadership, you don't have to be the technical guy that's actually doing the design. You just have to understand the environment to make the leadership decisions. So what we're saying is single point accountability to a suitably qualified, experienced built environment practitioner to provide client leadership, that's executive legal leadership in the planning, specifying, procuring, and overseeing of delivery. That is the client role. If that is brought in, but remember, nobody can exercise that job if governance is not in place, because he's got to report back into the committees. You can see we've got there the delivery steering committee, whatever you want to call it, the executive managers. He's got his line manager going up to the accounting officer, reporting. And remember, his mandate in leading a project is, if things are not going right, to bring it back closer to what was planned. If he wants to change the plan, he's got to go upstairs to management, to senior management to change the plan. So it's actually all very simple. Project managers are providing the information for reporting, which is giving you the status, allowing you to make decisions. And if you get the proper governance in place, I think we can have it all sorted out. And this can all be written in to our regulations for the triple PFA, at least the Public Procurement Act. But if we don't do it through that, we're going to have to find some other vehicle. But I think there is a good starting point there. So I don't know if there's any questions or anything else. I hope this has given you the context. Then this afternoon, I will go through some of the acts and some of the roles and responsibilities, and we'll end up in the last session with the various players that have been playing different things. We'll talk about the implementing agents, the difficulty with coordination and things like that. But I hope this has been insightful to help you with engaging rather than being a spectator to our industry. Okay. So I've given you an extra, so we've got an extra 15 minutes lunch. Okay. Or do you want to end the day earlier and come back? Entirely up to you. I will be finishing at so we're back at 1:45. Is that the general consensus?